Welcome back to day 9 of the Race to World First recap. Today, joining us for our intro, instead of Kalamazoo, I have a bag of trash. That's right. It's almost as good as our friend Kalamazoo. I'll put it in his chair here, and then we can continue our recap.
So, as discussed yesterday, if we had to talk about Echo's Reclear, we described that as very bad. And so,
it wasn't that. It was pretty bad. It was not good.
So bad news, we are going to have to discuss Echo's Reclear.
Yeah.
I think I said recap, but I meant Reclear.
Yeah.
So basically what happened was Liquid had an okay farm day yesterday whenever they killed all their bosses. You know, you typically budget a few hours for being able to reclear anything. Nexus Princess maybe took them an hour. Not too bad. Echo went to rebuttal, and they unfortunately took about 4 hours to re-kill Nexus Princess alone. Now, their killing of Silken Court wasn't bad, their Brood Twister wasn't bad, but their Nexus Princess was a few hours more than you had hoped for, and so then their re-clear was basically, it ended up being about 3 hours longer than Liquid's just in total, which we're getting down to the point in the part of the race where you don't really want to be losing 3 hours of progression, especially on Queen Ansurek. You need to be getting volume pulls. You need to be able to continue to get as consistent as possible with phase 1 and moving into that final phase. And so losing that amount of time is not great. I don't think it solidifies the race winner one way or the other, but it's one of those things that was unexpected and a little bit concerning.
One thing I'll say as well is that I think Queen Ansurek, there have been some bosses in the Race to World First where you can get a lot of value from watching what the other guilds have done.
Yes.
And then yoinking and implementing that. We have some bosses where, you know, World First guilds will take hundreds of pulls, and later guilds that are good can take 100 pulls or something like that. Like, that does happen. There are fights like that. Like, Sires and Athers would have been a great example of this if that had been televised more of its progression.
Sarkareth, I think, is a good example of that, too.
There are a lot of fights where it's like, oh, just learning what the 455 overlap looks like gets you a lot of intel. I don't think Ansurek seems a little bit less like that than average, I would say. Ansurek, I think, it's not like there's a lot of awfully new stuff happening in P1. You just have to build the muscle memory and do it, right? And, like, yoinking the Liquid strat is valuable, but I don't think it's a huge amount of value. Second phase as well. Like, second phase, there were some, oh, wow, that's what that looks like moments for Liquid working on that boss. But I think a lot of it is going to be people practicing the portals, learning the damage, living that damage, a lot of damage in that phase. It's a very, very hard phase, and I think that much of that difficulty is not yoinkable in the same way that some maybe easier phases are. So I think that Echo will be able to catch up somewhat. I think that they will probably be able to reach. So here's what the race looks like right now.
Yeah.
We have Liquid, 145 pulls, entering P3 on their best pull. One pull has entered P3. Echo, 50 pulls. Just about at the end of P1.
Still in the P1 intermission. I think that's what they've seen through most of the time.
I think that Echo will be able to get to where Liquid are at in less than 100 pulls. But I don't think it'll be that much less. So I don't think they're going to be able to claw back that much of the time advantage that Liquid have built. And I wouldn't be surprised if Liquid wake up tomorrow either only slightly behind or not even behind. And if that's happening on the end boss, that is very tough for Echo to recover from that situation. They're going to have to play really well today and tomorrow, and then kill the boss the next day.
So, talking about Ansurek Prague a little bit, it seems like Lust is going to be starting out into that phase 3. Right now, both Echo and Liquid are using Lust as like break glass of emergency, press Lust to be able to continue to see progression. That's how it's going to be used. I suspect that it's going to get pushed further and further behind, or further and further back, to the point where it lines up those Spy Master's webs. As you enter P3, you have all of your offensive CDs and Lust, and then you have like 20 some odd seconds of no mechanics to hit the boss, and then you have some mechanics going out, but you're still going to be able to do like a decent amount of damage to the boss. Notably as well, the damage that you're doing to the boss in phase 1 does matter for later phases as well. Talking a bit more about the Prague, I think that the thing that's going to be the most difficult and like the most seen from both of the guilds over the next 24-hour period is what the P2 consistency looks like. So basically the guilds are jumping from platform to platform and killing off a bunch of ads. At the end of this, there's like this shield that you have to break on one of the ads, and it has like I want to say like a 60-second cast, maybe it's like a 30-second cast, doesn't matter. There's a cast that you have to be able to get to the ad, break the shield before it goes off. It seemed a little bit inconsistent for Liquid actually making it to there. They also had to I think, changed a lot of their offensive cooldown management, and I think that that's actually been a lot that's been going on. And so assuming that they're able to get that dealt with, I think Ansurek Prog should pick up pace to where we're starting to see more P3 pulls from Liquid. And then as for Echo, it's like you're saying, they're going to need to be able to just have an absolutely banger of a day over the next 24 hours.
Yeah, they probably need 2 heaters in a row to tie this thing up, or maybe take a slight lead. But that's not impossible, and the guild's really, really, really good. So they're used to playing. They almost always make it to the end boss in second place, and they have more often than not won those races despite that happening. So I would certainly not be counting Echo out just yet, even though their Reclear was a little cursed.
I think whenever we're looking at Thursday kills, only one guild can kill Queen Ansurek on Thursday, and it's Liquid.
I think you're right.
For Echo, I don't think that they can kill this boss on Thursday, but fortunately enough for them, I think the most likely outcome here is still a Friday kill.
Yeah.
I would give Liquid maybe 20% chance to be able to kill this boss tomorrow.
Something around there feels fair.
But then Friday, I think that the boss is going down one way or the other for either Liquid or Echo.
I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't still. I feel like there it's maybe we're more than 50% that it does on Friday.
I said more likely than not.
Yeah, okay, but I don't think it's much more likely than not.
Okay.
I think there's a good chance that we're going to have a situation where, like, we think, like on Fire Act, where it's like, there's a day where everybody thinks it's going to die, and it doesn't die, and we come back the next day, and both guilds are pulling back to back, and it's going to be sweet.
I believe that there's a chance that there's a Saturday kill, and then there's very little of a chance that it's a Sunday kill, because I think that it's... I somehow suspect that the boss is dead before Sunday.
I think you're probably right on that. Although a lot will depend on how hard the end of the fight is, because
I agree.
That we haven't seen yet, and if it's really hard,
so
it could be a long time.
Let's take a look a little bit in terms of item levels and compositions, as you're seeing on screen right here. Liquid 625.3, Echo 625 flat. Basically no difference between the two. How are you feeling about the two comps that both of these guilds are running? Because it looks like it's mostly
here
the
are the
same
differences. Liquid have one more Frost Death Knight.
Yep.
Whereas Echo have one more Destruction Warlock.
Yep.
Aside from that, they're on the exact same plan right now.
I don't feel like those comps do different things.
They feel very similar to me. Yeah, I don't think like you're swapping one DK for one Warlock. I tend to think the DK is really nice to have a couple of on this fight because they got to play in melee the whole time and kind of fill that space with the various ground effects that you're dropping while pressing Death's Advance and avoiding getting gripped ever. So I'm a fan of Liquid's comp by a little bit here, but it's not by a lot. I think those two comps are very similar. Having an extra gateway for the other side in Phase 2 is very nice too. That will save you quite a bit of value in the second phase. So strong arguments to be made certainly for both comps. How have you been feeling about general comp diversity this tier as a whole? Because I tweeted recently with the tier list of all the specs that have been getting used in the race so far.
Yeah.
And I listed all the specs that hadn't seen any like experimentation by Liquid, Echo, or Method. And on that list were stuff like Fire Mage and Shadow Priest, which have now been seeing experimentation. Prot Warrior, which I think saw a little bit of experimentation. Maybe it didn't.
I don't know who would have played Prot
Warrior.
Warrior.
Maybe there wasn't a Prot Warrior, but there was, Prot Warrior, Mistweaver, and...
Survival Hunter.
Serve Hunter, yeah. But Shadow Priest now is off the list, and let me see.
Fire Mage was on there, but I think has been since at least tested, but not.
Yeah, now there are only 4 specs that I haven't seen anybody using of our top 3 guilds in Prague, which are Prot Warrior, which is not bad. It's just you've already got your Warrior buff, and your tanks are doing other important stuff. Serve Hunter, Mistweaver, and Resto Druid.
Yeah. So
is the balance... I mean, that's 35 out of 39 specs being used in Race to World First Progression by some of our top 3 guilds is very good, I think. I think it's been very cool to watch. There's so much different stuff that has been seeing play. I think there's a clear, like, S tier of the Warriors, the Mages maybe, the Shamans maybe as well, but even then, you're seeing a lot of fights where you're only playing 1 or 2 of these specs, and then some fights where you're stacking a little bit more.
Yeah. So I think the comp diversity comes from a couple of different places. First and foremost, I think that right now there are a decent amount of specs that just do very different things and are strong at very different situations. Some of those that come to mind, those Frost Death Knights, like you shouted out,
Yeah.
very good at cleave mechanics, very good at cleave fights, just generally speaking. And then like the Arcane Mage is probably the polar opposite, where they're less good at the cleave fights, so incredibly good at priority damage and single target damage in a lot of different situations.
They're great at any target count that is 5 or less. As soon as you start getting much above 5, they're not super happy.
I guess maybe the BM Hunter is a better example of that.
Yeah, BM Hunter completely worthless on AoE. You see them playing one on Ansurek. Hunter's Mark is good. But they're mostly there for the single target damage. They're not really helping with the AoE. You saw this completely cut entirely out of compositions on, say, Silken Court.
And just talking about it a little bit more as well, more often than not, you have fewer fights that are actually class stacked in a Race World First, to the point where you kind of need to bust out. Like, we didn't see, for example...
It's impossible to really stack with the amount of raid buffs that we have in the game right now as well.
Yeah. There's also a situation where you would never stack for something like... like a 4th or a 5th boss in like a normal tier.
Right.
Like Laridar and Naimu from last raid weren't stacked. Smolderon wasn't even stacked. You kind of played what was just generically very strong and what you thought you were going to be able to play on Fyrakk. But whenever, Brood Twister, Nexus Princess, and Silken Court are over 100 pulls, even into 300 pulls for Nexus Princess's case, you kind of have to break out like the absolute best single target comp for something, and that involves dropping your Frosty K's, even though they've been seen everywhere else. Mm-hmm. And like, it's not that Frosty K is necessarily bad for that tier, but it's more in line of they're very good at this very specific thing, which is obviously like AoE damage. And in that instance, do I think it's better balanced? I think it's hard to say it's better balanced because, you have the Frosty K's doing 20% more damage than other specializations on some things, but I think it's more unique in the sense of you have to be able to play to those strengths on specific bosses if you want the best advantage you can get.
Yeah, I think it's been really great for Race World First.
I think in terms of balancing, representation is the thing that trumps all, and so in that instance, I think it's better balanced because there are these things that you were just like very good at, so you should be brought.
If anything, I think the most offensive thing this tier is the Presevokers. Those things are not remotely normally.
I think everybody would tend to agree that the Preservation Evoker is not close to balanced, and it's because they're doing 200, 300, 400,000 HPS more than other healer options, and that's just completely bananas.
The number is just too big on that class, but aside from that, honestly, like, there's a lot of good specs. A lot of them feel OP when they're piloted well and when they're on the fights that they're good at. Frosty K, again, maybe a little bit better than it should be at that specific situation, for sure.
Enhancement Shaman's also like a weird state where it might be a little bit too good on specific...
Very skill-intensive, though, and we often are only seeing one. I think a lot of guilds are going to play as many as they have good Enhancement Shamans on these fights, which I think is... obviously, like, could it take a 5% nerf and still be fine? Yeah, probably. But I don't think it needs that much more than that, for example.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, too, that it's just so dependent on what the fight involves. Yeah. Like, we've even seen things like, we saw Shadow Priest brought in for a little bit for Ansurek prog, and then the Shadow Priest got subbed out.
Yeah.
And it wasn't necessarily because the Shadow Priest was bad. It was like, we actually do kind of need a little bit more AoE, and so the warrior is a little bit more valuable in this spot. The Shadow Priest is a little bit less good at breaking the shields than we thought that they were going to be, so whatever.
All right, so what are we expecting to see tomorrow? We're expecting to hopefully have gotten deep into Ansurek P3.
Okay, so
hopefully the boss isn't dead yet. We get paid by the day.
Don't tell them that.
We get paid by these videos. I get paid per video on the YouTube ad revenue, so...
I'm not getting paid for this.
Well. It was your idea. Look, you were like, you can put it on your YouTube channel. It's fine. You can put it on your YouTube channel. So.
Anyways, we'll be back tomorrow. Either we're going to be covering the end of the race. I suspect that we're going to continue to see prog, but there's a chance that it dies tomorrow.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
GN.